Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Little Rock, where love is our teaching and service is our prayer. My name is Barrett Goodwin. I'm a fairly new member here of the congregation. I'm a member of the grounds committee, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. If you're a newcomer, we're glad that you have chosen to join us for worship today. While you're here, please stop by our guest table in the foyer and fill out a guest card and pick up some information about our church. I now invite Debbie Goolsby to come forward to light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is printed in your order of service.
I light this chalice with these words: open our eyes to see what is beautiful, open our minds to learn what is true, and open our hearts to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, which you will find printed in your order of service, saying, love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
That passage of Garrett Kaiser's put me in mind of a newsletter column written maybe 30 years ago now by the Reverend Bruce Marshall, then my minister at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Huntington on Long Island, New York. It was titled, Bouquets of Goldenrod. Bruce told a story, as I remember it, that when he was a child, he picked a bunch of these lovely yellow flowers in a meadow near his childhood home and brought them home to his mother. She did not appreciate the gift, being allergic. For Bruce, who was not allergic to goldenrod, this became a life lesson, a metaphor for how we sometimes offer a gift or help that is not wanted or not actually helpful. As you can see, the story, however inaccurately I'm recalling it, has become such a metaphor for me. Kaiser's emphasis on the risk of seeing the other as a little too other speaks to our time. And I think to our president's address to the United Nations last month. I did not hear that speech, but after the news media got buzzing about it, I Googled it and read it. It disturbed me enough that I decided to observe an old Unitarian Universalist tradition today, UN Sunday. This Friday is the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. The United Nations Sunday became a thing because the Unitarian Universalist United Nations office needed to raise funds. The United Nations office was organized at Ambassador Adlai Stevenson's suggestion, he was a Unitarian Universalist, in 1962. At first, it operated as a volunteer organization. Unitarians and Universalists had volunteered service for international relations since the days of the League of Nations. The U.S. government might have not have joined the Little League, but we did. Between 1965 and 1970, the UUA provided funding to staff the UN office, but the UUA's 1969 financial crisis put an end to that. So some UU clergy in New York got to work reorganizing the UN office as a separate nonprofit organization. From then until 2011, the UN office operated on its own budget and had to raise money for it. UN Sunday was a major vehicle for generating gifts from individual Unitarian Universalists. Now you can imagine the anxieties this raised in finance committees in our congregations. Don't have UN Sunday during the pledge drive. Some churches might have budgeted an annual gift to the UN office, but I never encountered that. Faith and Action committees could be equally anxious about UN Sunday, worrying about some kind of competition between local projects and a faraway thing like the United Nations. Usually, in my experience, a small group of thoughtful, committed church members, to adapt Margaret Mead's phrase, the only thing that has ever changed the world, we're the ones who organized UN Sundays in our congregations, often recruiting a local expert in international affairs to speak from the pulpit that day. Of the more than 1,000 member congregations of the UUA at high water mark, about half of them got involved with the UUUN office. In its 50th anniversary year, the UN office dissolved its separate corporation to become part of the UUA's International Resources Department, but it still depended on designated gifts, not the UUA budget, to operate. 2 years ago, as part of the general reorganization of Unitarian Universalist International Ministries, I think, the UN office was handed off from the UUA to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. It was thought that the work of the UN office was well aligned with and could strengthen the Service Committee's work toward expanding human rights around the world. And that makes sense. The UN office has cultivated a reputation for taking the lead in advocating at the UN on issues others were reluctant to take on. It led a faith-based caucus whose work supported the creation of the International Criminal Court in 2002. The U.S. government was then and has remained opposed to that court, and on that, it seems, we have bipartisan agreement. The UN office participated in the Millennium Development Goals adopted by the UN in the year 2000 and formed a local partnership in Ghana to launch a demonstration project toward one of those goals. It was called Every Child is Our Child, and it ensured that children infected with and orphaned by AIDS got health care and education. At a Paris conference called by the UN's Public Information Department, it got sexual orientation and gender identity diversity on the conference's human rights agenda. That's for the first time at the UN. Got it on the agenda for human rights. The UN office also had an internship program for youth to develop future leadership. All of that is indeed similar to the Service Committee's work, so now the UUSC maintains the UU office at the United Nations in the United Nations Church Center in New York. Our long-standing involvement in the UN is one reason why the President's behavior at the UN last month pushed my buttons. I knew that. But even more affecting was the contrast between the President's remarks and the purpose of the UN stated succinctly in the preamble to the UN Charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. These words were 1945, just to remember that. And to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. And for these ends, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people. We, the nations of the United Nations, for these ends, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. And then there follows the outline of the UN organization. As I reflected on what the President did and said that day, wanting to get beyond such easy assessments as, what a jerk, I turned to the research of the Moral Foundations Theory Project, founded by Jesse Graham and Jonathan Haidt. Haidt has stepped away from the project around 2012 after he published his book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. But he remains on its advisory board. Graham now leads the project team and in its continuing research. You can find their work and participate in it, if you like, at the website yourmorals.org. Very easy to remember, right? So I've followed their work for years because their approach is so interesting. They examine the complexities of the moral intuitions that guide our decision-making and often override rational reasoning, exploring the role of such things as self-interest, reputation, cultural biases, and behavioral phenomena such as altruism and hive mentality and things like that. It's an empirical, cross-cultural approach relying on surveys. They look for patterns in their survey data and consider ideas from a variety of academic disciplines to try and explain them. They're not looking to prove a particular theory. They're trying to discover the mechanisms of human moral behavior. It's significant that they focus on moral intuitions. An intuition is not something thought out. It's a feeling, and we might not even be able to name it precisely. So when they think they've identified a moral foundation, they describe it by naming a virtue and a vice, a pair of words that lets us know what moral intuition this foundation is concerned with. So far, they have named 6 such moral foundations: care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, and they've noticed 2 varieties of that, one where fairness means equal, and the other where fairness means proportional. Loyalty versus betrayal, purity versus pollution, or sanctity versus degradation. They've named that one 2 different ways in different writings. Authority versus subversion, and depending on the situation, either of those could be the virtue, right? So they added a 6th one: liberty versus oppression. So those are their 6. They also mentioned 2 moral foundation candidates that they're working on: honor versus dishonor, which has come into greater focus as they've surveyed folks from non-Western cultures. And the other one they haven't named a virtue and a vice for, but it's to do with respect for property rights. Again, those are possible, not official, moral foundations in their scheme. In his book, Haidt compared the way these moral foundations resonate differently with people who describe themselves politically, and at this point it was Americans he was dealing with, people who describe themselves politically as liberals or conservatives. And he identifies what he calls the conservative advantage. Liberals react strongly to the foundations that have to do with care and fairness, and far less with the others. By contrast, conservatives react strongly to all of them. So conservatives have more resources for persuasion, irrational persuasion, right? They can say, yes, yes, we care and we want what's fair, but we don't want the betrayal, degradation, subversion, and oppression you liberals are advocating. Sound familiar? So thinking about the president's UN speech, I made myself a little chart comparing the message of the UN Charter with the president's message. And what it pointed to was how the president's remarks focused on loyalty, authority, and purity. For example, he spoke in favor of controlling migration through strong borders and how European nations have put their cultures and traditions at risk by not doing that. His remarks tinged with moral judgments concerned with betrayal, subversion, and degradation. And he expressed little or nothing in the way of moral feeling about care, fairness, or liberty. That last one surprised me. I thought sure there'd be plenty of freedom. Talk in his talk. There wasn't. He's often said, of course, from time to time, that some person or group has not been fair to him. But that's about loyalty, not fairness. Compare that with the UN Charter, which expresses strong moral concern for care, fairness, and liberty, as well as for loyalty, for example, nations being good neighbors and stronger together, and authority, as in respect for treaties and international law. So that all of that helped me to see more clearly why the speech disturbed me so much. It still, though, I felt like there was more to it. The president's speech expressed a certain attitude that we're all familiar with, and many have labeled it his authoritarian tendencies. I wondered if I might find a clue as to what more there was that made this one speech so disturbing to me. If there might find a clue in his previous 4 addresses to the UN General Assembly, given back when the Republican Party leaders were busy trying to manage him, remember that? And various executive agencies still administered or advised on federal policies, remember that? Famously, he spoke last month without a teleprompter. What might he have said with a teleprompter? Here was some evidence that might let me know. I was amused to see that one of the transcripts I found was carefully titled, "As Prepared," suggesting that the delivery wasn't quite true to the written speech. I know, shocking, right? I found in those transcripts 2 divergent tendencies. One was a coherent and compelling conservative case for nationalism, but the other was steady attention to the values and purposes expressed in the UN Charter. One of the most shocking lines in last month's speech was when, after complaining that the UN wasn't there for him while he negotiated 7 different peace deals, all I got from the United Nations, he said, was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle and then a teleprompter that didn't work. After all that, he asked point blank, what is the purpose of the United Nations? Each of his previous speeches, at least as prepared, mentioned favorably the UN Charter's goals of peace and cooperation, prosperity, human rights, and women's rights. They even endorsed the UN's more recent commitments to the decriminalization of homosexuality. But each also insisted on a principled realism. and understanding that only strong, secure, sovereign, independent nations that respect the interests of their own people and respect the rights of every other sovereign state, only such nations can coexist and cooperate with mutual respect, defend their own people's interests, and allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of life. The future does not belong to the globalists, one of the speeches declared. The future belongs to the patriots. Some speechwriter had put together a compelling conservative approach to the UN's stated goals and a strong defense of nationalism, arguing that nationalism was the key to the UN's effectiveness and success. That reminded me of something. I've been reading recently some of the writings of an historian called Emanuel Wallerstein. He died just before the pandemic at the age of 89, sometime in his late 30s. He started working on an approach to history called world systems analysis. I'm not going to go too deep into it. His work turned into a 4-volume tome, which he was 81 when the last of the 4 volumes was published. In 2004, while he was still writing that last volume, and possibly because he wasn't sure he could finish it, he published a nice little volume, less than 100 pages, called World Systems Analysis and Introduction. And if you do want to know more about it, I would recommend you start there to see how much you can stand. The premise of Wallerstein's work is that round about the year 1500, the economic, political, and social systems of certain parts of Europe changed in a significant way. What we now call capitalism was beginning to develop. Elements of capitalism were ancient. What was new at that time was the accumulation of capital. Around 1500, political, economic, and social institutions developed specifically to make that happen. People at the time might not have seen it that way, but that was the effect. And the more capital accumulation there was, the stronger became Europe's position in technology and trade, and the more this capitalist organization of society spread around the world. But sometime after 1900, he thought we started moving toward a new transformation of economic, political, and social systems, and that is what is generating all the turmoil we are living through now. He argued that strong national states played an essential role in capitalism, creating conditions and protections for those large accumulations of capital. Without a teleprompter, the clarity and coherence of the speechwriter's framing was lost, and the president ended up talking about how open borders was destroying nations. He actually said to the General Assembly, "I've come here today to offer the hand of American leadership and friendship to any nation in this assembly that's willing to join us in forging a safer, more prosperous world," as if to suggest that they should walk away from the UN, presumably with him. His tone of contempt for the UN was unconcealed. It's clear that he no more wants dialogue there than he wants it here. The something more that made the speech so disturbing was that to him, it seems, a deal is an alternative to dialogue. We don't have dialogue. We have negotiations that go on for a short time, 2 weeks maybe, and then we have a deal that we stick to or wriggle out of when it's no longer favorable. Negotiation is never about mutual understanding. It's about power, principled realism, peace through strength, othering the other, bouquets of goldenrod. Yesterday morning, at Broadway in the Capitol, there was a different kind of patriotism on display, a patriotism with love at the center. Expressing that kind of patriotism might be, in this moment, our best way to support the United Nations. There were national flags and the national anthem, yes, and our love of country was expressed as love of our diversity as a people and our love of democracy. That's what the sign said. That's what the t-shirt said. And the chant rang out. Let's say it again. We are what democracy looks like.
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 Every day.
Every day.
Every way.
Every way.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
All the people.
All people.
Young people.
Young people.
Old people.
Old people.
Our people.
Our people.
Straight people.
Straight people.
Gay people.
Gay people.
All people.
All people.
We are what democracy looks like.
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 Amen.
I invite Debbie Gilsby back up to extinguish our chalice. Please join me in our closing words, saying, "Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings."
And may we celebrate and learn and grow together.
Amen.